This happened back in 2010, when I was 15 years old. I was on a camping trip with my school class. My best friend Charlotte and I were disliked by all of our classmates, so we kept to ourselves for the most part, both in school and during this trip. We had one other friend we hung out with a lot, but aside from her, no one wanted to be near us. I had my camera with me, as I always did back then. My camera, along with my diary, was practically an extra limb for me. It was a nice, hot summer day, and Charlotte photographed me as I sat on a big rock by the water, writing in my diary. We were being silly as we always were, laughing, making funny poses, etc. Out of nowhere, we heard a voice behind us. A guy was standing there. We didn't know how long he had been there. He started talking to us, but we had a hard time understanding most of what he was saying. He had a very deep voice and didn't speak our language very well. He said he was from Bulgaria and was camping nearby in his trailer. We exchanged looks, wondering, what does he want from us? Here's a snippet from my diary at the time. Alright, Charlotte and I were by the water. I sat on a big rock and she photographed me. Then, some older dude came by who could barely speak. He asked how old we were and what our names were, etc. Then he took a seat next to me and asked if I had a boyfriend and stuff. Then he started asking Charlotte to take photos of me and him together. We thought he was kind of creepy, but young and naive as we were, we didn't think much of it. If this happened today, I would probably just say no and ask him to leave us alone. He sat there next to me, smiling at the camera. I remember feeling extremely uncomfortable, which is very obvious in the photo I still have to this day. Something weird happened next. He asked for a picture, but as soon as Charlotte snapped it, he exclaimed, No pictures, no pictures. Charlotte and I looked at each other, confused. Why did he ask her to take a photo if he didn't want his picture taken? The whole situation was strange and was starting to creep us out. I don't remember much about our conversation, but I know Charlotte and I eventually ran to our teachers and told them about the guy. They told us to stay away from him because something about him seemed off. We agreed and went on with our day, hanging out with our friend, taking photos, and having fun. Later, we needed to use the bathroom, which was in a building near the trail park. While two of us waited outside as the third used the bathroom, that Bulgarian guy showed up again. That same uncomfortable feeling returned as soon as I saw him. This time, he had some friends with him. He walked up to me and asked if I wanted to see his trailer. I knew right away that nothing good would happen if I went with him. He kept saying his trailer was really nice and that he wanted to show it to me. He even tried to bribe me with beer. I'm only 15 and I don't drink, I told him. He gave up after a while and walked back to his friends. A few hours passed before we needed to go to the bathroom again. This time, he was already outside the building when we arrived, as if he had been waiting for us to show up. My heart sank and I felt a lump in my stomach. Once again, he came up to me and asked me if I wanted to come with him to the trailer. He kept mentioning the beer and how lovely his trailer was. I kept saying no, and he seemed to become agitated. My friends and I decided to go into the bathroom together, and when we were done, we basically ran back to our campsite. We went straight to our teacher and told her everything, especially how he'd been acting toward me. She was furious and told us to stick together at all times, and to never go to the bathroom alone. We hadn't planned on leaving each other alone anyway, especially after this. Later that day, as we were playing around and listening to music on our phones, we were walking back to camp. As we passed the tents, we saw our teacher further away, talking to that guy. We could tell she was really giving him an earful. At one point, she pointed at the soles of her shoes, then at him, and we were like, what is she saying to him? Then we started laughing, but we were also nervous, unsure of how he would react to this afterward. We saw him walk away, and he looked at us, giving us the finger as if we had done something wrong. We ran up to our teacher and asked her what she had said to him. She was all riled up and told us, I just told him to leave my girls alone. and that he could go somewhere else to get water in that bucket he was carrying as an excuse to walk through a campsite. We cheered for her and asked why she had pointed to her boots. Apparently, she had threatened him with her steel-toe boots, saying they'd leave a print on his ass if he came near her girls again. She was a great teacher indeed. After this, whenever we ran into him, he just gave us the finger. Another snippet from my diary. When Charlotte, Ellen and I went to the church and took pictures, we met the man in blue on our way back. We got really scared, but all he said was, "Hey, excuse me," and gave us the finger. I just said, "Thanks, you too," and we kept walking. We called him the man in blue because of the blue t-shirt he wore. When we went to sleep that night, one of our teachers parked their car close to our tent, and they took turns keeping watch. We didn't see him again. We all had to call our parents and go home around 4 a.m. Because of the weather, it poured rain all night, and our entire tent was soaked inside and out. A few days later, I actually saw that guy downtown, and my heart skipped a beat. Luckily, he didn't notice me, and I haven't seen him since. It's creepy to think about what might have happened if I had agreed to visit his trailer. I didn't fully understand it back then. It didn't sink in that he was an adult and I was only 15. It didn't occur to me how disturbing this guy really was until I thought back to that moment, all these years later. It was October 29th, 2024, and we were all 15. About 2 weeks earlier, I had organised a Halloween meet-up with my 3 childhood friends at my house, which is pretty isolated, set far away from the city, and near some empty farms. It's been a tradition every year to invite my friends over to camp outside in a tent outside my house, but this time, I wanted to add some extra excitement. For privacy, I'll call my friends Ray, G, and Adam. Ray was the funny, tall, average-built one. G was shorter but super chill, the kind of friend you could always relax with. Adam was my best childhood friend. We'd hung out almost every day each summer since we were 10, and had been in the same class for 6 straight years. They planned to arrive around 2 p.m, and we aimed to head out to our camping area by 4 p.m. Ray and Adam arrived first, so we set up snacks, packed our backpacks, and joked around like any other 15-year-olds. We planned to get to the camping area using a couple of motorized bicycles and my dirt bike. I had my dirt bike, Adam had his own motorized bicycle, and I also had a second bike that Ray could use. But soon, we realized that Adam's bike had a busted clutch cable. We spent a while trying to fix it, but we only made things worse. By the time that G showed up at around 3:30, we had to adjust our plan. We decided that I'd take G on the dirt bike, Adam would ride my other bike, and Ray would wait back at my house while I made a return trip to pick him up once we got the others set up at the camp. The camp area was about 8 kilometers away, requiring us to cross a quiet highway and follow a bumpy, gravelly farm road. This camping area wasn't anything official, just a flat spot in the middle of a field where I like to go to chill and clear my thoughts. By the time G and I arrived, it was already getting dark, so I rushed back to get Ray. When we finally all gathered at the spot, G and Adam had already set up the firewood, but hadn't lit the fire yet. It was pitch black, and the place felt eerier than usual. We got the fire going and started grilling sausages, enjoying the solitude. The area is always empty, no one ever uses that road. Then, out of nowhere, we saw a helicopter fly over us. We laughed nervously, wondering if they'd spotted the fire and thought it was some sort of cult gathering. About 3 minutes later, we saw car headlights off in the distance, maybe 2 kilometers away. The car seemed to just be sitting there with its lights on, but after a few moments, it turned them off. We thought it was weird, but didn't give it too much thought. Then, we noticed a massive tractor, one of those with crop-cutting blades in front of it, slowly moving through a field about 200 meters away. We didn't think anything of it at first, but then it started heading straight toward us. We quickly moved our bikes and bags out of the way, but the tractor kept getting closer, like it had no intention of stopping. At the last second, I grabbed our helmets and moved them just before the tractor rolled over the fire, extinguishing it. Then it stopped right there, turned off its lights, and just stood still. It was pitch dark, and we couldn't see inside the cab. We all stood there, creeped out, wondering why it would almost try to run us over and then just stop. The tractor stayed in place for what felt like an eternity. None of us could see a thing inside, and the thought that someone was just sitting there, silently watching us, gave us chills. Finally, I told everyone to pack up as fast as possible. 2 of my friends somehow squeezed onto the back of my dirt bike, and Adam got onto the motorized bike. We sped off, with one of my friends clinging on and nervously looking back. He said the tractor was still just sitting there in the dark, without its lights on, as we got about 100 meters away. After a tense, silent ride, we finally made it back home about 20 minutes later. We tried to brush it off, only mentioning it once, but the whole experience left us shaken. Now, thinking back, I can't help but wonder what the driver's intentions were. Why would someone drive so close to us, extinguish our fire, then just sit there in silence? I keep imagining that while we were staring into that dark cab, maybe the driver had already slipped out of the tractor, silently watching us from behind one of the wheels, hidden in the shadows just a few steps away for those straight 5 minutes. The thought still sends chills down my spine. It was right around this time of year, 3 years ago, when my current boyfriend and I first met. A few weeks later, we went camping on Halloween weekend in the woods right next to the supposedly haunted Helen's Bridge near Tunnel Road in Asheville, North Carolina. It was a beautiful spot up there with a great overlook and with the bridge right there, along with all the stories we'd been told about its hauntings. True or not, it added just enough thrill for a little scare. I wish I could say Helen's Bridge, as we had planned, was the scariest part of that weekend. Not even close. It was Halloween, and we were planning on going to a show that night. T, my boyfriend, and I planned that I would get ready at camp while he walked into town to get some drinks and something to eat before we left. If he didn't make it back before dark, it would be no more than 30 minutes after that. I didn't have any problem with that. I had a lot of experience solo camping, and was pretty woodsy. The only thing that might spook me would be a bear if one happened to wander up. We had chosen a super secluded, more backcountry sort of camping area, so it would just be us the whole weekend, more romantic that way. As usual, it didn't take me long to get ready, and it was super peaceful up there. I knew it would be about another 45 minutes or so before he got back, so I decided to read a book in the tent with the door open for some air. 10 minutes into reading, I heard a fairly large branch break about 10 feet behind my tent. I learned how to gauge the size of an animal by the sounds that they made walking through the woods. This one sounded big. A bear, I thought. It wasn't quite pitch black out yet, so I got out of my tent, turned around, and shouted to scare it off. But there stood a huge, probably 6'5" or 6'6" man. Completely taken off guard and nervous about the situation, I instinctually said, "Hi." He replied, "Hello," and walked closer. Looking back, I wish I hadn't been so friendly, but it was just habit. I assumed he had set up camp somewhere nearby and would introduce himself briefly before leaving. I was horribly mistaken. I don't know if he was saying things to scare me or get a rise out of me. I don't know what parts were true, and I still don't. He immediately started saying things like, "What's a pretty little thing like you doing alone in the woods all by yourself? Don't you know bad things happen to pretty little girls like you?" Then he said, "What are you hiding out in the woods for?" "I'm hiding because I to my girlfriend's sister. I can tell that bothers you. It bothers you a lot, doesn't it?" My heart sank completely. I was fairly certain my stomach was going to fall out of my body. I was shaking, hoping he couldn't tell since it was getting darker. I tried to appear calm, like I was just annoyed at his presence. I rolled my eyes and grabbed my water bottle, giving myself a few seconds to figure out how to tell him to get away from me. Maybe just that. Yep, let's go with that. But when I looked back up to tell him, he had somehow, very quietly, gotten significantly closer to me. He was close enough to punch me in the face, which he did, causing me to fall back. I was probably knocked out for only a second. When I opened the only eye I could, he punched me again and tried to get on top of me. Terrified, I rolled out of his grip and just kept rolling until I got up and started running. I didn't know where I was going. I had no light, no shoes, and no phone, and it was at least a mile or so before the nearest neighborhood. I was screaming as he chased after me, yelling,
"You're dead when I catch you. You're so screwed when I catch you."
I eventually reached a car and hid under it. I didn't see him after that. I was too scared to go anywhere near our campsite, especially at night. So I knocked on a nearby house and asked to use their phone to call the police and my boyfriend. Ironically enough, it turns out the guy's name was Jason. Halloween got entirely too real that year. My best friend and I try to go camping once a year. We've been doing this since we were 13 years old. We've never really been truly scared or have anything weird happen until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We showed up during peak season on the first night, and space was very limited. We were losing daylight, so we set up camp on a spot on the side of the mountain that was an absolute wind tunnel. The morning came, so we went into town, drank beers, and goofed around until late afternoon. By the time we got back up to the mountains to switch our camping spot, we were losing light again, but managed to find a more remote spot. We set up our tents, got the fire going, and started drinking again. Time went by, and it was probably around 1 a.m. when we saw a flashlight aimed at us. Then it started moving in our direction. We didn't think much of it and assumed it was a park ranger coming to fuss at us about something. Because who else would walk up on you in a remote part of the mountains at 1 a.m? I don't know about you, but ever since I started camping, I learned it's kind of an unspoken rule that you don't walk up on someone camping that late at night, unless it's an emergency. Anyway, the person got close enough, and we realized it was just some guy, probably in his early 50s, in a t-shirt and basketball shorts, with his girlfriend, who looked to be in her 40s and was avoiding eye contact with us. The man immediately forced a conversation about nothing, didn't acknowledge the time, and didn't say anything about his girlfriend. His eyes were darting all over the place while he was talking to us about random stuff, like the model of lantern we had and how cool it was. He kept saying weird things like how he used to be in law enforcement, which was completely out of context in the random conversation he started. Then, out of nowhere, he pretended to notice our tents with his flashlight and said,
"Ah, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup."
The way his eyes and flashlight kept moving around gave us both the feeling that he was trying to see how many of us were there and what we had on us. It was clear we were being sized up, but for what, I don't know. Once this guy got a good look around us, he kind of paused, ended the conversation, and walked off into the woods. Once his flashlight disappeared, my friend and I looked at each other, and without me saying anything, he said,
"We're packing our stuff and getting out of here."
So, we did. This was the most unsettling experience I've ever had while camping. I think this guy was planning to come back once we were asleep. I don't know why, but I do know that we were 100% getting sized up that night. It might not seem like much, but if you've ever had a moment with someone who was sizing you up, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.